In 1944, everything in George VI's world that wasn't the Second World War seemed determined to remind him of something that he was not ready to hear, which was that us four, his treasured family dynamic, which was also turning into a group coping mechanism for his job, would soon be subject to quite a lot of change because his oldest daughter was growing up. In late January 1944, not too long after George VI found out that Princess Elizabeth even had a boyfriend, the King, Tommy Lascelles and Winston Churchill were all blindsided by a reasonable-sized cabinet rebellion led by the Home Secretary, Herbert Morrison. The cabinet rebels were calling for Princess Elizabeth to be made, sometime soon, Princess of Wales, once she'd turned 18 in April, which would also take her from long-term heir presumptive to, finally, heir apparent. Now, considering the former Prince of Wales's popularity with the Nazis, making Princess Elizabeth the new Princess of Wales retrospectively looks like a pretty great idea. We might have had to have done the investiture on a budget, but it would have been popular. But the King wasn't ready for his daughter to grow up. Both he and Tommy instinctively objected on many levels to anything we'd never done before, and Winston appeared to be outraged at the cabinet insubordination. So, good idea or not, heir presumptive without other titles she stayed, even as an adult. Now, the old-school way of prepping for royal engagements was to have the highest-ranking person in your family contact the highest-ranking person in their family, figure out if there were going to be any objections first, which they did this time as well. In March 1944, King George of Greece first floated the idea to George VI of maybe an engagement, perhaps. George VI came down heavily against an engagement at this time, but when he wrote to his mother about it, he had good things to say about Philip personally. I like Philip. He is intelligent. He has a good sense of humour and thinks about things in the right way. And that made the king unusual, because the opinions of Philip in the wider family and court were far less complimentary. Summing up the general opinion, Tommy Lascelles would a few years later tell Harold Nicholson that early on the court found Philip rough, ill-mannered, uneducated, and would probably not be faithful. Ouchies. Part of the reason that Philip had so many issues with the court was that the king was sending out rather mixed signals about him. Oh, sure, he was friendly with the young man, but he also held up his British citizenship for 2.5 years. Philip applied to become a British citizen in 1944, and for someone fighting in our navy and as well connected as he was, it should have gone right through. But Uncle Dickie somehow just couldn't get the matter to move forward, and Philip would have to wait until early 1947 for George VI to release the citizenship handbrake, as it were. Personally, Philip handled this well. Whenever he was asked about marriage, he would say that as a serving officer, he just could not think about it until after the war was over, putting him and the king on the same side of the king's main concern until at least August 1945, which must have helped the personal interactions along a bit. Apart from his daughter's still very young age, the king was concerned that she hadn't met enough young men yet to make up her mind. The normal aristocratic impulse to marry upwards would be mission impossible for his daughter, and his own route to marital happiness had been a bit windy, taken some time and more than one girlfriend, and now Princess Elizabeth had an awful lot of upper class and straight options. He wanted her to take some time, really get to socialise, look around at some future earls and above for preference, and be sure that a future with Philip was what she wanted. To that end, she was introduced to the future dukes of Grafton and Rutland. No sparks among the future dukes flew, but the princess, the future Duke of Grafton, and his future wife would all become lifelong friends, so that was nice. Princess Elizabeth went to the small dances organised by her mother. She met the approved young men, but she just wasn't looking because she was pretty sure she'd met the young man she wanted to marry. They'd started their relationship as much as they could with the war on, and she was happy. When Philip visited, sometimes Crawford would take the young Princess Margaret out of the way a bit, and there would be dancing then anyway. Being royal really helped Philip with other royals, particularly two of the most senior. George VI and his mother Queen Mary both rather treasured the royal distinction in their different ways, and importantly it made them look on Philip as one of them. While the royals were at the top of George VI court, the whole court, the social fabric that Philip now had to move through, was less than 10% royal, and made up of around 90% nobility and their cousins the gentry. The difference between the two being a light sprinkling of demi-royals and a few genteel upper-middle class people. The nobles were the Queen's class. As the royals were her husband and his mother's tribe, so the nobility were hers. She'd grown up with them. They were her social circle. She held their ancient British traditions. They were the courtiers, and in all the senior household positions, if it had a fancy title or anything to do with government, it was almost certainly occupied by one of them, and the most prestigious posts were often filled by invitation only. They were a tight-knit, exclusive community who started their connections through their large extended families, then by going to the same very few and very exclusive schools and universities. If you didn't know someone, you knew someone who knew them, went to the same college at Oxford, had a brother that graduated with them at Sandhurst, or who had been in their year at school. This Greek prince chap's education record was Cheam, Salem, Gordonston, Britannia. I mean, what the hell even is that? Does anyone know him other than his bloody uncle? And the nobility had been positively looking forward to the fact that, with the whole non-Nazi prince shortage, young Princess Elizabeth was almost certainly going to end up marrying one of them. Which was never a problem for us until we imported the damn Hanoverians anyway. And then Dickie Mountbatten, of all people, finds he's got a handsome prince of a nephew in some minor royalty, launches him like he's a new perfume at Dartmouth, when the princess is still in ankle socks, and let's face it, easily influenced by a handsome face. Once the matter hit court, Uncle Dickie became quite the drag on the ticket for Philip. Few court members liked Dickie Mountbatten, and fewer trusted him. Sometimes that was down to the fact that Dickie was a left-wing progressive in a massively conservative court, who liked change and could elbow someone aside a bit to get things done, as his family maintained. And sometimes, from the perspective of people who weren't family, it was because he was a treacherous sod that bent with the weather, lied like a con artist, and who may have already betrayed you on the way to whatever it was that Dickie Mountbatten needed this year. And I believe that Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother, might have quietly pressed subscribe at that if she were with us here today, because she didn't like the Mountbattens at all, possibly ever. She did come around on Philip, with time. The marshmallow made upon a welding machine, as Cecil Beaton so impeccably summed her up, first got captured being catty about the Mountbattens all the way back in August 1924, when she was still a pretty new Duchess of York, and she would remain consistently distrustful and aloof of both Dickie and his wife Edwina for the rest of their lives. Given that she never saw eye to eye with him and didn't trust him, the idea of Dickie reinvigorating and magnifying his influence on the royal family via Philip had to taste quite bitter. And for Queen Elizabeth, there was more than one piece of baggage to be found in Philip's family connections. On his father's side, Philip's cousin, Princess Marina of Greece, had married into the British royal family in the 1930s, becoming Duchess of Kent. And she was unwise enough to insult her sister-in-law, Elizabeth, when she was still Duchess of York. To find out what her insult of not even mediatized meant and why it was royal fighting talk, you should press pause pretty soon. But if you don't want to go that deep, just know that it was a way for Marina to say of Elizabeth that, taken on her own, she wasn't even the lowest rung of royalty. Unfortunately for Marina, Elizabeth was going to become the most influential consort since Prince Albert roamed the earth, and a woman that, though she had a great deal of love in her heart, only had a limited amount of forgiveness in there, and a memory for betrayal like a mafia don. Despite getting the upper hand in the relationship since 1937, according to Cecil Beaton over 3 decades later, the then Queen Mother still hadn't forgiven Princess Marina for those early barbs. By 1944, Marina's situation was getting pretty ropey. She was a recent widow, doing lots of royal work but without an official salary, raising 3 children largely on her own in a very modest royal residence, a house called Coppins at Windsor. And that year, Marina decided to offer Coppins to Prince Philip and Princess Elizabeth as somewhere for them to meet that wasn't under the feet of her parents or in view of other prying eyes. I imagine some chaperoning still went on, but it had to be more private than a palace where your parents employ everyone. Her mother might have only seen the rather callous and ambitious Marina of their youth, but her daughter met a hard-working mother of 3 that was a great help in her early relationship. And Marina would get a far more stable future in the next reign. Under Queen Elizabeth II, she got an official role and an official salary and an apartment at Kensington Palace. While George VI and Queen Mary were quite delighted with Philip's family connections, Queen Elizabeth was having to rather tolerate them. The most direct evidence of the Queen's discomfort with the idea of Philip marrying in is that the most aggressive and widely noticed of the small chorus of court voices being raised against Philip belonged to David Bowes-Lyon, the Queen's younger brother, closest sibling, her confidant, and a man who owed his invitation into the heart of court life and the influence that gave him to his sister. David Bowes-Lyon was a largely out and very extra gay gentleman who came of age in the 1920s, and from the historical record, he appears as someone who would have been hard to shut up, and Queen Elizabeth could be very passive. But clearly, the Queen's younger brother did at least not meet strong discouragement while bad-mouthing Philip for over a year. And the court noticed that neither of the princess's parents seemed to be rushing to add Philip to the family, and that one of them might well be reluctant, and open season on him rather continued. If the princess went off him, where would he be, eh? With Philip away in early 1945, the highlight in Elizabeth's life was joining the ATS, or Auxiliary Territorial Service, and a training program that was designed to turn her into an expert driver and a decent maintenance mechanic, in which she got to interact with ordinary students. Eventually, they started with a sergeant on either side of her at lectures, and the officers would whisk her out of the room the moment a lecture finished and away from any social interactions that might happen with fellow cadets. But apparently words were had, because after a while everyone unclenched, and soon there were chatty cups of tea with the girls in between learning about starter motors and nighttime navigation courses. She also put up a rather large photograph of Philip on her mantelpiece that year. Crawfey was worried that it would be recognised, so Elizabeth replaced it with a photograph of Philip, but with a full beard. "There you are, Crawfey," she said. "I defy anyone to recognise who that is." Then the war finally ended. Both VE and VJ days were that summer, and the princesses went on their famous incognito jaunt on VE Day, accompanied by young Lord Porchester, also known as Porchey, the future Earl of Carnarvon. Young Porchey was an excellent shot, and due to his skill he was often awarded prime positions near to the king when shooting at Sandringham. The king had also earmarked young Porchey, a young racing expert, to accompany Princess Elizabeth to Ascot. And by October 1945, the nobles were noticing the closeness of the relationship and rumbling that perhaps here they had an excellent contender of their own breed, and they might just be able to stop playing this damn involuntary game of Who's That Greek? Ah, The Crown Season 1 Porchey. Soulful eyes, crisp dry humour, and a voice like chocolate. I mean, who wouldn't? An actual Porchey was pretty good looking too. And they did get on quickly and easily for her. But the chemistry, according to both families who are adamant about it, was never romantic. This was something else. The relationship between Porchey and the future queen was a close friendship based upon a shared obsession: horse breeding and racing. And for Princess Elizabeth, who was a little socially awkward and genuinely shy, and who later got the permanent social barrier of becoming a queen regnant, Porchey was someone she could talk to, easily and comfortably, on a subject where they were both obsessively developing their expertise. And that was a friend she was going to hang on to for as long as he lived. And according to Princess Anne, the one person that on the telephone would just get put straight through to the Queen, no questions asked. It's just that the court had been hoping to unseat Philip with Season 1 Porchey, but what they got was a relationship far more like Season 3 and 4 Porchey. Incredibly close, durable, not much undertone. So the anti-Phils at court really went in on poor and foreign, because with Philip's birth status being the definition of royally acceptable, that's what they had left to work with. Royal poor was never the same as real poor, of course. The worst consequences of being poor were not something that Prince Philip ever had to worry about. After famously becoming an exile in an orange crate at just 21 months old, he was raised in a compound in the Saint-Cloud area of Paris until he was 9 and attended an international school there. The exile was real. Had it not been for the intervention of Dicky Mountbatten and diplomat George Talbot, Philip's father would very likely have been shot, and the family were penniless until they got to Paris. But in Paris, the Greek royal family in exile was supported by 3 great female fortunes. 2 of Philip's Greek royal uncles had married the heiresses Marie Bonaparte and May Stuart. and Philip's branch on his mother's side got extra support, as his uncle Dickie had married the richest heiress in the world at the time, Edwina Ashley. Prince Philip would always have enough for essentials: a decent roof to go over his head, a square meal waiting somewhere. Educational and medical fees would be found, but royal charitables could often be quite tight, given to ignoring the existence of inflation and complaining endlessly about the taxes they had to pay. Philip was a royal, but he was one used to making do with not very much. He had an actual job, his best friend was a colonial commoner, and he'd never had a servant, although as an adult sometimes members of his Uncle Dickie's staff helped him out, as a kindness or perhaps as future employment insurance, because Princess Elizabeth taking a shine to him made Philip's future look pretty bright, pretty young. But materially at this point in his life, he had his naval lieutenant's pay and a small sports car he'd managed to buy, and that was it. He was self-reliant, organised, and pretty domestically skilled, as he was serving in the armed forces and largely looking after himself. But apparently sock darning was a domestic skill he never managed to pick up, and he could sometimes be found pimping out his ragged socks to anyone that had the skill to mend them. And at this stage, Philip was far more accommodating and respectful than the later man that we would recognise as the husband of the Queen. Young Philip knew how courts worked, and he was used to being on the periphery. He was aware that his position as suitor to the heir was vulnerable and would have no status until they got engaged. Poor might be something that the nobles got sniffy about, but it wasn't a problem for the royals. Princess Elizabeth was always going to have resources. In fact, looking back, being poor might have been the one thing keeping Philip humble. Everyone said how polite he was, so he was apparently pumping the brakes on his sarcasm quite hard. And once you got Philip repressing the sarcasm, his sense of humour looked just like the Windsors at the period. Larky, fond of games, japes, and practical jokes. But the silly kind, not the cruel kind, so there's that. Thinking that he might not fit in at Balmoral? The man was educated at Gordonston and said that he liked it. He'll be perfectly happy getting soaked on a moor somewhere. And in summer 1946, Philip finally got the most intimate of royal invitations. He was invited to Balmoral for a good part of the summer. Elizabeth was now 20, Philip 25, and the visit went well. Very well. During his stay, Philip proposed and was accepted by the princess. The king could have technically stopped it with the Royal Marriages Act, but for the era, Elizabeth was now a good age to get married, and Philip was royal with no black marks on his marital or war record, and the marriage was likely to be popular. So the king and queen chose which battle to fight and which to lose, and agreed in principle to the marriage with two conditions. They were going to fight a rearguard action and continue to delay, which was a good idea. It was already clear that Philip could be very dominant, and Elizabeth was both dutiful and one of the most passive heirs to the throne that Britain had ever produced. So there was to be no formal engagement before the princess's 21st birthday, which would come in April 1947. And before that, there would be a period of reflection while the princess accompanied the rest of her family on a 12-week tour of South Africa. So the king and queen accepted Philip, but negotiated a 14-month engagement period and a farewell tour for us four.